There are two presentations. One will be done by Sushanta. Presentations have about 20 minutes, and then we're going to have a joint panel of discussants, and each discussant will probably take 15 minutes. There are 3 people on the discussion panel, and the first one will be Prabhala, the second one will be Josh Feldman of the IMF, and the third gentleman who will be joining in will be L. Vishwanathan, who is a partner at the Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas law firm. Right. So without further ado, Sushanta.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Sujan, for inviting me here. It's indeed great to be here and great to hear to lawyers. This is an important problem, as it has been already discussed, that corporate insolvency is a serious problem. And we have had a number of mechanisms to deal with corporate insolvency. When you have corporate insolvency or debt overhang, it creates problem for banks. You can have bank failure. But in India, we haven't had any bank failure as yet. So what I'm going to do here in this paper is to look at the effectiveness of the out-of-court institutional mechanisms that we have had in place over the last 10 years, and see whether the program has been effective or not. And so what I will do is to look at the debt restructuring program. Just to briefly, I'll outline what the program intends to do. Second, I'll look at whether this program has enabled greater pricing power by banks. And then I will do a range of robustness tests to understand whether the CDR has had any favorable impact on bank performance. In this case, we are looking at bank stability. And we also try to do the number of parametric and non-parametric tests to see if there is any selection bias. Sometimes the selected banks will tend to opt into the CDR. So we'll try to control for that, then look at the effectiveness of CDR. In other words, what we are saying is CDR could be endogenous. There would be more powerful bank could enter into CDR. So we'll control for that and check what happens. So what we know the story, that this was the second biggest airlines in India. No one would expect that such a big airline is going to go bankrupt, right? It happened in 2012, and this was effectively, the company was grounded in 2012 with debts of over $1.5 billion, which is equivalent to 100 billion rupees, right? So when you have this kind of bankruptcy, clearly you need a legal system which can deal with this bankruptcy within a short period of time. But because in the absence of a strong legal institution, so because the regulator doesn't want the companies to fail, which can create a overhang, NPL overhang for the banks, because if you have, as we discussed in the previous discussion at the lunchtime, that India has primarily a bank-based financial system. When you have a bank-based financial system, the regulator needs to intervene and to make sure that the financial system or the banking sector is stable. If there is banking stability, therefore you will have financial stability in the overall system. So what they have done is they have introduced this out-of-court institutional mechanism, which we call CDR, and look at and try to, I'm going to discuss in the next slide what are the features of this program. But what you see in the absence, when you have bankruptcy, clearly on average, you have, it takes about 4.3 years to solve a bankruptcy case. And this is the estimate from the World Bank. But this is twice as long as in China. And the point is how much you could recover, even if it is done, what proportion of the collateral could be recovered through this process, through the legal channels like BIFR, DRT, and so on. So effectively, I think it was discussed earlier that banks could recover only around 20%, or here 25.7 cents per dollar could be recovered. Why it is so low? It is low because the assets of the company, because the legal process takes so long. As if the assets are divertible, it could get transferred to some other company, and by the time the bank gets control over the assets or the collateral, there would be nothing left. And therefore, the recovery rate is so low, and it's very important to have this kind of out-of-court institutional mechanisms that can help banks to recover the assets, although it takes a longer time to recover the debt, but it can be effective. So we want to see, so what is the key features of this mechanism? That it's out-of-court institutional mechanism, and that banks could use in order to restructure corporate debts of over 100 million or more, which could be staying in multiple banking accounts. So it's a three-tiered mechanism. I'm not going to go into that. And essentially, we know that this is the CDR cell which is going to implement that. So what does it allow? It allows regulatory forbearance on two things: asset classification and provisioning. So in other words, you are classifying assets from bad assets to good assets. It's like something like relabeling. And you are allowing for the regulator, that's the Reserve Bank of India, is allowing for low provisioning of 2% on these restructured loans. Okay? So clearly, you are trying to make use of this mechanism in order to sort of hide these bad assets. Okay? And that can, in other words, increase profitability. Okay? So theoretically, you would expect this to have otherwise, if they were not done. So if you did not restructure, then clearly banks have to keep aside more provisioning. Let's say if it's a bad debt, it could have provisioning to the extent of 10 or 15%. Instead, the system or this mechanism allows for only 2%, and which could be good for banks, and that should give rise to increase in profitability. So what we see here, in 2012, they increased it to 2.75%, and at that point in time, many banks started to restructure. They started to disclose the bad assets that they had on their books. And you can see that from that point on, 2.75, the provisioning went up, then it went up to 5% in 2013, and that gave rise to a significant increase in restructured debt. So my analysis here is based on data until 2012. Okay? So a lot of the problems that you would see after that, I will not be able to reflect that in the analysis that we have done in this paper. So even if you look at the total restructured loans as percent of total loans, which comes to around 16% of total loans, which is a very significant number. When you look at the NPL of banks, you don't see this kind of number. It's like 5 to 8% or around 5%. So when you look at these bad loans, 16% is such a significant number. If this was not restructured, what would have happened? Clearly, this would have significant impact on the bank balance sheets. You could have had financial or bank instability. So please note that point, and this is what we want to uncover from the empirical analysis. What I'm going to do is to link it to the basic framework that is used in the banking literature, where people look at, more banks with high market power tend to be more stable. We know that from the literature in the case of European banks, in the US banks, and so on. There is also another strand of literature where people have uncovered that greater competition is good for banks. Okay? So in other words, greater competition means low market power, low pricing power of banks. So there are arguments on both sides of this, but let me not spend too much time on that. But what we are interested in is to look at the papers that are written in the context of Indian banks, where you find a lot of these papers have looked at the relationship between ownership structure and bank performance, and also people have estimated the efficiency gaps between different categories of banks, like public, private, and foreign banks. And I'm not going into this debate here, but my focus is on this. Here, we want to look at these different legal and institutional mechanisms, how it has helped over time in reducing credit risk for banks. So what we have seen since the financial liberalization started, we have seen this Debt Recovery Tribunal Act came into being, which led to a significant reduction in the non-payment of debt. Okay, so you have a higher recovery in that sense. So at the same time, in 2002, we had the SURFACE Act, which gave rise to strengthening creditor rights, therefore helping reduce secured debt, etc. So in other words, the whole objective is to improve the recovery rate, and these things have helped. But one difference between these two acts impact all banks uniformly. What CDR does, it will affect the bank who participates in the program. Okay? So hence, the CDR will have a bank level impact, which these things will affect, these acts will affect all the banks uniformly. Okay? That's the difference between these mechanisms. So my objective here is to look at the effectiveness of CDR mechanism on bank stability. How do I define bank stability? This is the standard way people define, and where we look at return on assets plus this equity share. In other words, this is the total benefit per unit of risk. This is the volatility of return on assets. And this, so in other words, if an increase in this Z score is going to reflect higher bank stability. Okay, so please keep that in mind. So using that data, we separated banks into two groups. The banks who participated in CDR program and banks who did not participate. The blue one is the giving you the average stability of banks who participated in this CDR program. Okay, so here you have an improvement, but again, this is giving you some information on average. Okay, so it's important to look at what happened to the distribution of bank stability. So you know, not that all banks are joining at the same time. Different banks would have joined at different points in time. So what we are trying to do before they entered and after they entered, that's the kind of analysis we are doing at bank level. Okay, so not just before 2003 and after. It's not that. We are looking at bank level. There are differences before and after. Then we are looking at over time. So you have a problem of a difference in differences. So if you look at the distribution, clearly you see signs of instability in the banking sector before they enter into CDR. This is the distribution before entry. And you can see there are multiple clusters. In other words, there are banks with a very low level of stability and a kind of middle tier stable banks, and this is top tier banks with very high stability. So you have three different clusters or three different modes in the distribution, and that really reflects sign of instability, and that disappears after they entered into the program. Okay, so you have a unimodal distribution. And what happens if you cumulate that, if you construct the cumulative density function to see banks who joined this program, joined the CDR, whether they were better off after entry. So what we see here, this is before they were pretty much similar or overlapping. Okay, after entry, what you see here at any given level of density, you see the banks who entered into the program, the difference actually is higher here. So in a cumulative sense, clearly that the banks who entered the CDR program stochastically dominating the ones who did not join the program. So that is, this is like, in other words, a first order stochastic dominance. So one can actually replace this Z score with a lot of other indicators, like for example, return volatility. You find a similar pattern. There is an improvement here with regard to, so in other words, lower return volatility, the better. Okay, so there is higher bank stability. Similarly, you can look at non-performing loans. We replace all these and use them alternatively to check whether the results are robust or not. Even if you look at non-performing loans, you clearly see a declining trend for both categories of banks. You can also look at loan loss provision and so on. So what we do is, another objective is to look at the impact of CDR on market power or pricing power of banks. How do we define pricing power? We look at, there are three different measures of pricing power we have used in this paper. One is, this is the conventional learner, which is called, and the price is basically total revenue to assets, marginal cost is is derived from a stochastic frontier analysis with 3 inputs and 2 outputs. And these are the inputs and outputs, loans and securities for a bank. I mean, this marginal cost is derived from a total cost equation. Let me not go into that. But let me show you this. So what you are seeing here, banks with high market power tend to experience lower marginal costs. That's obvious to understand. And so this is clearly you can think that this market power itself could be endogenous. So, so what we did here, if we plotted that market power, that is e-learner index here, you can clearly see after entry, after 2003, this pricing power of these banks who entered into CDR has improved over time. Although, the ones who did not join, they're probably better quality banks. They have a higher pricing power. But however, these banks who entered into the program, they have improved their pricing power. So what we need to do now, there is this problem of endogeneity of this market power. Market power is endogenous process. Then you had 98 deregulation. This is the second phase of deregulation. So what I'm doing here is trying to look at this bank stability, but without CDR. That's my first step. That's the baseline or benchmark specification. So we have a range of bank characteristics. We have the macro characteristics, and we look at the impact of this competition or market power on bank stability. Okay? And so we get the data from standard sources. Only thing which comes from here, this IV instruments to explain the endogeneity of market power is business freedom, and we also use information on bank merger. So the banks who merged between themselves, it takes value 1, otherwise 0. So let me skip this and let's look at the results. Okay? So what we find? So clearly here there is no CDR in this regression. There is no CDR. We have the different learner indices or market power indices. Clearly you see here this is positive and significant, and banks with the high market power tend to be more stable. That's the finding here. Or high pricing power, they tend to be more stable, and there is clearly this endogeneity of pricing power or market power, and which is actually supported by the tests. So, and the instruments that we have are also valid. You can replace that using the alternative types of market power indices. There is clearly the similar result. Okay? But also that banks with high market power tend to be more stable. They tend to experience low non-performing loans and so on. Okay? One can also look at the different categories of banks. Banks who are at the low end of the distribution, high end, and in the middle. We still find, what we find here is those who are at the low end, they experience instability, which you clearly saw from the density plot I showed earlier. So now we introduce CDR. Okay, so we want to know what is the effect of CDR in the benchmark specification that we saw in the previous slides. So what is happening, the CDR is what kind of variable? It's an indicator variable that takes a value equal to 1 if a bank signed inter-creditor agreement. Okay? It can happen at any point since after 2003. And so a bank would have joined in 2005. So 2005 and onwards, it takes value 1, before that 0. And so we have a data set is starting from 92 to 2012. So you have 20 years of data to analyze this effectiveness of this program. So this beta 1 is doing, what it is doing, it's capturing what we call difference in differences effect. So in other words, you are looking at differences between the two categories of banks. You are looking at differences after between the two categories of banks. Okay? Then you are looking at over time. That's why it's called DID effect. Okay? Treatment effects of CDR on financial stability. It is also possible that there could be an interaction between market power and CDR. In other words, we want to know whether CDR influences banks with high market power or low market power differently. Okay? So therefore, there is some degree of interaction between the two. We want to see whether there is any kind of threshold or critical point beyond which CDR may not be effective for those banks with high market power and so on, okay? And what happens, this coefficient become another level of difference. It tries to separate the coefficient in between high market power and low market power. So just, here I'm just going to show you just the, thank you. Yeah, I'll try to summarize. Here I'm trying to show you just the data. If you look at the data clearly, before they become part of the CDR, there is no econometrics here, just the data. And the stability score clearly shows that this was positive. The member had a higher Z score than the non-members. And similarly, we did took the average after, and you see this, the difference is also statistical significant. Then we looked at, then you do the difference in differences, okay? This minus that gives you this number, which is also statistically significant. Whatever you see here, it gets reflected in the coefficients that we obtain in this regression as well. So you can see clearly across a range of specifications, we find that CDR has indeed helped these banks who participated in the program in improving their stability, whether you consider the Z score or you consider the negative of return volatility. But banks with high market power, very high market power or very high pricing power, they are not able to benefit from CDR program because it's a negative and significant. It is positive only up to a point, which you see here. It's only up to 0.36, the benefit. But in other words, how do we explain this? Banks with low pricing power, they benefit from CDR, but banks with very high market power, they don't benefit from CDR because the effect is negative. It is also possible that these banks who with very market power could be entering into other mechanisms like DRT or SURFACE Act. They may not be joining or they may not qualify to be part of this CDR program. So in the interest of time, it is also possible that the SURFACE Act was introduced around the same time as CDR, that's 2002. Therefore, there could be some degree of correlation between the two. It's important to control for that. Even after having control for that, you still find a favorable effect of CDR on bank stability. So what we do next is we try to see, it is possible that banks who are joining CDR, they could be, so I have no time, but what I've just, I'll say one line too, we have done propensity score matching to show that characteristics are similar. Once, even after you have control for that, their characteristics, taking into account the matched sample, you still find that CDR is positive. CDR has positive and significant effect on bank stability. We have also done this another two-step approach to show that there is no correlation between the selection equation and the stability equation. So that's the final set of results. What we find is that CDR program did indeed mitigate the debt overhang of corporates while dealing with the NPL overhang of banks. And the results remain robust, but this positive effect of CDR diminishes for banks with very high market power. In other words, they probably don't participate in this program. But this program has come to an end in April 2015, but therefore it is more of a temporary solution which may not be a permanent mechanism to solve the problem that we are discussing here in this conference. So I'll stop there. Thank you.